Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our second series in our FaceTime sessions. We are so excited to bring this series back. And we are so excited that you have joined us for this recording. We are extremely excited about the next series that we've got of these. Dr. Gerry has put together a fantastic group of speakers, starting today with Dr. Jeff Burg. As you may remember, my name is Allison Farrell. I am Fireside's Director of Marketing. So glad that you've joined us, and I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Dr. Gerry for an introduction of today's speaker.
Are you're excited, Allison? Are you? You seem very excited. You said excited quite a few times. I was keeping track of how many times you
Oh, you have a
said,
tally? Okay.
yeah, yeah. It's
We are
exciting.
very excited.
Yeah. Well, Jeff Berg, I'm delighted to say, is quite a good friend of mine. We've had remarkably interesting conversations having to do with everything from pediatric dentistry to things way beyond pediatric dentistry. And Jeff, uh, tell everyone just a bit about yourself, please. You're in just outside of Salt Lake City, but you have
Mhm.
a remarkable background when it comes to what you've achieved and the scaling that you achieved in pediatric dentistry. Just if you tell us a bit about yourself, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I did my residency in Houston. I came out of that in 2002, and I was looking for, I felt pretty confident about my speed and skill set or whatever. I was looking for a practice to purchase. I already had three kids by then, and I didn't want to spend a few years bouncing around as an associate. I wanted to get right into to owning a practice, and I was lucky. I found a practice that was here in Utah, and the I still had a year left in my residency, and the pediatric dentist that was selling it, I was looking in the back of journals or whatever. I was looking for for a practice where that might work out. And I kept seeing this practice advertised, and they were doing about 1 million a year top line. And he had it listed for sale for 400,000. And if you know anything about like practice valuation, like that's a pretty good deal. 40% of revenue on a decent sized practice. I mean, 1 million a year isn't, breaking any records, but it had been around like, it was a decent size. And so I had more than a year left in my residency. I called him up and I said, hey, I kind of explained the situation. And he said, well, I already have somebody who's interested in it, but if she doesn't purchase it, I'm going to drop it to 300,000. And I said, okay, please call me if that happens. And a couple of weeks later, I got a call from the woman who was going to purchase it. And she said, yeah, I'm going to purchase this practice, but I only want to work a couple of days a week. And it's a busy practice. And I'm looking for, an associate. And I just kind of said, no, I'm not interested in that. And then he called me back about a week later and said, she's not buying it now. I'm dropping it to 300. So I flew out. I was able to get a little earnest money just from family to sort of put down on it. And and he was willing to wait a year for me to finish my residency. And so that was the first practice.
Now, it's interesting to me, Jeff, that clearly you wanted to run a business. You wanted to own a business and run a business right out of the blocks. And
Yeah, and I didn't realize that maybe going into dentistry. I've had people who sort of know my story say, "Well, you're a business guy who just happened to be in dentistry." I I didn't know that. I just knew that, and especially that first year that I owned that practice, it was really like the numbers and what we were sort of doing that I was tracking that kind of spoke to me personally. I mean, I love the patient care and I love interacting with the patients, and that was great. And it was a busy practice, so we were seeing lots of patients. But to me, it was like, how do we take these baby steps and improve? That really spoke to me. And so I
you didn't have a formal business background at that point. that's interesting to me because every dentist of every flavor knows that we just don't get anything in the way of valuable business training in dental school. Hey, did you run a business before you went to dental school or anything like that?
No, no.
That I find that quite fascinating because as you're aware, Jeff, I still have 7 university appointments, and thanks to Specialty Dental Brands, which Jeff represents in large part, um, I visit these schools uh, once a year, and it is very rare for me to encounter anyone of any type that is even remotely thinking of buying an existing business when they graduate.
Yeah, yeah, that has totally flipped. I mean, when I was going to school, that's what there were a few people who were considering, being an associate if they hadn't figured out where they wanted to do their practice yet. But it was by and large, most people were making plans to either, have their own practice or build their own practice or something. And you're right. I mean, I think that the demographics, I think the larger like debt climate
Yeah.
kind of makes that a harder thing to pull off for new grads. And so, yeah, you see many more of them, if not all of them, making plans to, yeah, work somewhere, maybe a couple different places for a year or two and get their feet under them and then kind of get going on that, or if ever. Like I think there are some where the lifestyle of just sort of, having more freedom and not having to worry about a business that, their name is attached to and they're on the line for, additional debt and things. Maybe that's not appealing to some. And so, yeah, I think there are some out there who,
But
in
eventually
fact,
you,
I have doctors who work for me who they're happy with that. They're happy to punch in, see patients and provide great care, but not have to worry about after hours what's going on with the business or the practice itself.
yeah, I think that there's a lot to be said for being a valuable associate. A lot to be said for that. If a person knows that they don't want to run a business. Now, I sidebarred you there, but eventually you had how many partners and how many practices did you have eventually?
So, yeah, over the course of, almost 20 years, I had 21 locations, and those include, I mean, most of those were pediatric dental offices. There were a handful of orthodontic offices at the very end, right before we, just pre-COVID, as we were sort of getting ready to find a larger partner. Um, we had a handful of general dentistry practices. A couple of those were like COVID hit, and there were a couple of older doctors who had been trying to sell their practice anyway. I had two of them come to me and said, "Will you just take my practice? Just take over. If you'll just take over the lease, like it's yours." And I didn't know how to turn that down, I guess. Couldn't say no to that. So anyway,
Did that turn out to be a good move?
well, yeah, I mean, we didn't have them very long. Maybe those couple that were sort of just, the keys handed over less, maybe a year or so before when that happened from when we rolled into specialty dental brands. And of course, they specialize, their partners are strictly pediatric dentistry, orthodontics, and oral surgery. And so we bundled our general dental practices and then sold those off to a different group. But yeah, at the time at the high point, that's how many. And so within that, like I said, we had ortho, we had some general dentistry, and we have our own surgical center as well. That
How
is,
many how many how many partners did you have eventually?
I mean, partners. I tried to keep my doctors from wanting to be a partner for a long time. I was
Really?
I was I guess you could say I was stingy with the equity. Um, there was a point when like the three doctors that have been with me the longest um, were interested, even in just like a small, and I'll tell this to other people who are building but are getting pressure from their doctors because they want to be a partner. Sometimes just the psychological framing of where a doctor or their wife or whoever can say they're a partner is more powerful than the amount of equity we're talking. Because originally in my mind, I was thinking, I don't want to split this thing up four ways. I don't want to, I didn't want to get into that kind of a scenario, but they were willing, they were happy to actually buy in for just a couple percent of the total, pie. And because then they could, they could, and by then, we were, let's see, we were probably six or seven locations when that happened. And so anyway, yeah. So I had a couple of doctors that had bought in at that point, and then we went for about another 10 years or so. And then at that point, I was getting to the position where, uh, if the right kind of situation came along, I'd be willing to divest of, a larger amount. And so we had a group of the doctors sort of get together with some outside, family and friends investing. And even with that, I still kept a portion of the practice. And that was about 3 years before we ended up partnering into specialty dental brands. So, in terms of just doctors, I mean, we have now within this what is still that original sort of Burg, group. There's about 20 doctors. Um,
How many employees or team members, as we're supposed to say
I
these?
mean, team members, yeah, employees, staff. I mean, I know that's not the whatever, but yeah, it was a couple hundred.
Yeah, see, to me, as many people watching this are aware, that actually gives me delirium. I mean, I'm getting gastrointestinal distress even thinking about that since I ran this boutique practice with only two people working with me, a front desk and an assistant in my orthodontic practice. And it's fascinating to me how a person like you is builds things to a scale to me that is just incredible. Now, what I'm curious about is you look, so you've been a pediatric dentist for how long? Refresh me on that one.
Uh, 23 years now.
Okay, 23 years. If you were going to hit the restart button and knowing what you know now, there's a different
Yeah.
fantasy of if you're going to hit the restart button, but you didn't know what you know now. Now I'm asking you, based on this experience and what you have built, would you do the same thing again? And what would you do differently?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I would definitely do multiple locations again. Part of the thinking on that too, and I think pediatric dentists are uniquely positioned to sort of pick up on this one little aspect that was really the seed for the reason why I expanded like I did, and that is most pediatric dentists at some point they're seeing patients in a hospital or a surgical center. There's a certain subset of the population that they have enough work but they're young enough that you can't do it in the office, and so you need some place to do that. And it's usually not, if they're going to a hospital or surgical center for those cases, they're not doing it in their office. But for a busy office, you might need somebody to work the day that you're in the hospital. So, and that was happening already in the practice that I came into. So I was able to sort of see it right away. And what I noticed was that I can pay a doctor to work in the office for the day that I'm in the surgical center, and I can pay him enough that is competitive and he wants to be there, but still have something left over. And that was really kind of intriguing to me and sort of interesting. Like, I did not have to show up in the practice that day, and I still made something. And granted, I wasn't like, I always tried to be generous with my doctor compensation. That part of that was to keep them from wanting equity. So part of that was a little bit selfish on my part, but that was the way that I had doctors who were motivated to be there, and so I could pay an aggressive compensation to the doctor and still have something left over. And so that sort of got me thinking, if I could just duplicate that, as many times as I can, how long is it before, if I wanted, I could step away completely and not have to, have to be in the office. And really, so a lot of times doctors, and you see this in dentistry a lot, they refer to the profitability of their practice in terms of their overhead. And when a doctor talks about overhead, what they're really talking about is all of their expenses except what they take in doctor compensation plus profits. Because if you're an owner operator, everything after you've covered all your expenses is yours to do with what you want anyway. And so, you know, people talk about their overhead being 50% or 55%, or if you've got a lot of things you're doing in your office, it could be, 70%. But whatever is left after that overhead, that's what the doctor can take home or invest into his practice or do some other things with. And the thing that I found is that, without being too, business savvy or too aggressive on your cost cutting or things, I mean, a pediatric dental office should be able to do 55% overhead, which means the owner doctor, if you're the single doctor in there, you could be taking home 45% of your revenue. And
You think that that's a reasonable target?
I think that's yeah, definitely
You think
reasonable.
it's a reasonable target for one office, multiple offices, or it makes no difference?
So we were running at 52%. So when I say 55%, I'm being sort of generous that maybe you're not being as aggressive as you could be on some of the things to be really efficient in the business. Um,
With
and,
your experience with specialty dental brands, how many pediatric dental offices are partnered with specialty dental brands at this point?
today, I mean, there's 250 total. So of that, peds I think makes up, um, I think it's close to 30%. We're slightly heavy on ortho, so ortho might be 38% of that. But I think the peds is pretty close to a third. The oral surgery is the lower of the three, but
So
we
what I'm curious about
so a
is
number of locations. Yeah, I guess I would say I don't know what is that 80-ish, probably
well,
right around.
yeah, to me that's a incredible amount of experience for me to ask you this particular question. Uh, of the practices that specialty dental has acquired and the ones that you're intimately aware of, the inner workings financially, what do you see as the single biggest mistake that people make when it comes to percentage of overhead, employees, rent, supplies, bip, bip, bip. What do you see as the most egregious thing that people are not paying attention to that they should pay attention to?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, so your rent, or and assuming you don't own your building or your lease or even your financing for it, if you can get that down to 4 or 5% of revenue, like that's not gonna the needle is not going to move, unless you're like really starting out and your practice revenue is low because you're growing. That percentage is obviously going to be higher because that's a fixed number. Um, that's not going to move too much. Supplies, I mean, for a peds practice, they should probably be, I don't know, 4 to 6% or something like. And there are ways to save on that, but I think the biggest mistake that people make, and I'm not saying like people make this mistake, but I think the assumption is that in order to be efficient, if I can find ways to cut costs here, because to me it was like, why are we dithering about if I can get my 5% of revenue for supplies, if I can get that down, cut that by 20%. So now you're talking about 20% of 4%. Like that's a really, I mean, that's a number, and you need to be doing all of those things to make sure that you're functioning at the highest level. But the biggest thing you could do, maybe just start doing better at talking about sealants when your patients are in the door. And even if insurance doesn't cover them, I see a lot of practices out there where if insurance doesn't cover it, they're not going to bring it up. And I think that's a disservice to the patient. But what it does to your practice, if you're generating, say, $200 per patient visit, and you're not being very aggressive about sealants or some preventative things, if you could add a couple of sealants per visit, suddenly you've added maybe 20% or 30% to your top line by just talking about that one thing or training your staff on how to educate parents before you get in the room and talk. There are things that you can do to make a much more dramatic effect on the top line. There are things that you have to do on costs. And like I said, you do have to be making sure that you know, you're hitting all of those things that you don't want to be paying more for things than you have to. But
Yes.
I would way rather see a practice figure out ways that they can provide more service to their patient and thereby increase the top line than, worrying about, how can I get this extra percent? Now, it's true, every percent that you cut, that's going to flow to the bottom line, and that's an extra percent that the doctor can take home or invest in the practice in some other way or whatever. But you could get more of that by being more focused on the top line. So
Yeah, the
those are
top line.
important. That's a good question because those are each of those cost segments are important. The largest cost, every dentist knows this, is going to be payroll. So, do you really need five assistants? Could you eliminate an assistant and pay the remaining four just a little bit more and save a little bit that way? Like that's a very effective way because that's the largest bucket in your cost, sort of waterfall is going to be your payroll. Outside of that, supplies, lab, rent, just sort of building maintenance over, that kind of thing.
I get the impression, tell me if I'm wrong, but I get the impression that a lot of practices, um, whether they're pediatric dentists or not, but pediatric dentists focused, that they're real top heavy on their employees and they could they could do with fewer employees. And I think it was Kent Oberman. I'm quite sure it was him years ago, a long time ago, decades actually, made the comment that when someone leaves the business, whether it's a hygienist or an assistant or front desk, he would go to the team and say, well, we have some choices here. One choice is to hire somebody else. The other choice is to divide up that person's work and not hire somebody else. And if you're willing to do that, and if it works, then there is a reward, financial reward, and that for everybody. And I think he did it with a pool of money that they would split up. Now, of course, the doctor deserves the biggest, a bigger percentage of that pool.
Mhm.
But then if it doesn't work, and I'd like to know what you think of this idea. If it doesn't work out, in other words, if people aren't bringing it up the way they agreed to do as a group,
Mhm.
if you have to hire somebody else, people are going to they're going to take a salary cut.
Yeah.
Now, one way to do it is a salary cut, and the other way to do it is this pool of money that exists that gets divvied up at some point. What do you think of those ideas?
Yeah, I think pre-COVID, those were like that was a great way to go. Yeah, it's still a great way to go. It's just that post-COVID, it feels like, at least to me, that the workforce has taken sort of this generational change, and it's you have to really balance people getting burnt out. So you can ask them to do more, but now is your turnover like increased because people are getting burnt out? So you really have to find a balance. You can't burn people out because it's harder to find good people today than it was 5 years ago. And so you have to be careful about that. I think it's a valid point, and it's valid to say maybe we have six assistants, but one of them was sort of a floater, and do we really need this floater? Like, could we get by with five and maybe build in a production bonus or some sort of bonus system, which I'm a fan of. That way, when the office is busier and people are working harder, there's an additional financial benefit to them as well, because the practice should be benefiting from that as well. But
What do you think the biggest reason that this is a part A and part B question? What do you think the main reason that people quit is, or well, quit is the right term. Whether let's say um, team members. So I
yeah,
don't know if hygienists would quit for different reasons than assistants or front desk. And then the part B of that is, or part C is, what do you think that the biggest reason that doctor associates decide to quit?
yeah. Well, for team members, it's a different. I think it's a different reason. I mean, Harvard did a study. This was years ago, and they were looking at this was in a lot of different industries, and they found that the number one reason people quit or change employment is because of their direct report, their manager, whoever it is that sort of has, authority over their position. That's the number one reason.
Yeah,
And
and I've seen that from Marcus Buckingham, and
yeah,
that the biggest reason, in of course it wasn't dentistry, is as you just said, it's their manager that they, and it's not money. The
yeah,
biggest reason was not money, which kind of shocks people because, I think that a lot of business people see employees as kind of like hookers, that if you pay them enough money, that it'll work out. But that's actually not the case.
yeah. No, it's not. I mean, we've had people who thought they wanted to leave for more money because somebody down the street was offering some worldly amount or something, and usually, I wouldn't say usually, but we've had instances where people wanted to come back because
How do you?
even though it was more money, like the environment wasn't good or their manager there was bad, or they've wanted to come back. And usually, if they were a great employee, we've been willing to take them back. Um,
Yeah,
but
this falls along.
I don't like sort of rewarding people for jumping ship and then wanting to come back. But it also goes to it has been hard to find really good people. And so when we have somebody who's good and they left on, good terms, it was just sort of them, exploring some things. Like we've been willing to take people back.
Yeah,
And
it falls along the same lines of stuff that you and I have talked about for a long time. The research I did through the National Institutes of Health, the Medicine Division, the main reason people cooperate and the main reason they don't cooperate is real straightforward. It's because they like you, they cooperate, and if they don't like you, they want to get out of there. They don't cooperate or they want to
yeah,
make your life miserable.
I mean,
Um,
dentistry is a service industry. It's a relationship industry. Y- y- you have to put the time into to work on those relationships, even with your own team and staff, and definitely with doctors. Doctors, it's a little bit of a different scenario. I mean,
hold that thought
yeah.
just for a second. What I want to ask you about that is, what do you think, in your experience, and I will say your expertise, is something really critical to preempt people from leaving? Because usually, I think a lot of times the boss is like a goose in a new world, thinks that everything is absolutely fine, and then wham, uh, people or a person quits. What would you say is the biggest thing to pay attention to so that you're preempting that before it goes into some sort of meltdown?
So we've done a couple of things over the years. We'll have so we have these team meetings at least once a month. Some practices, if there's a lot to work on, they might do a couple of them a month. But usually monthly there'll be a team meeting. And in that meeting, every team member sets a goal for themselves to work towards over the next course of the next month. And that might be, if you're an assistant and, you're cleaning teeth, maybe it's, um, because I was talking about, the sealants issue just a minute ago. Maybe it's, coming up with a couple of conversation starters that deal with sealants, like some did you knows to the parent that they can talk to the parent about while they're cleaning the child's teeth. But there are other things too, like maybe it's working on the handoff between handing off the patient's done, and handing them off to the front desk. What are some things they can say in that touch point that would solidify like a really good appointment, but also get them primed for making their next appointment. So there are 100 things that could be worked on, but people feeling like they have a purpose in the organization and that they have input into the direction of the practice, I think is really important, especially with this most recent sort of generation that's out. They want to feel like the work they do is meaningful and that they're playing a role in kind of guiding the direction of that. And so I've always been one where I do not have all the answers, and every practice that we sort of acquired or started along the way, every team member, we value everyone's input, and if there's something that we could be doing better, those are the things that we talk about in those, once a month meetings. Aside from that, the office manager also does, of course, we'll do the reviews on a regular basis. We've done those, biannually, we've done those annually, but that's not really enough. And so we've had office managers, make a point to have a little bit of an interview once a month with each team member, just check on them. How's it going? Even aside from work, are there anything stressing them in their personal life? Like, what can we do to make their life better? And those are things that, help you as a practice owner and as a business owner get a better read on what's happening with your team members. Sometimes you can forecast, um, if a person like you feel is getting close to leaving, you can at least sort of plan for that a little bit. But you end up keeping a lot more people that way, I think, over time. People feel
Yeah,
valued more.
that's something that's actually been proven. Marcus Buckingham is the person I like to quote because I can remember his name. And also the studies he did were remarkably meaningful. The one thing you need to know about great managers, great leaders, and sustained individual success. And also another one of his was first break all the rules. And uh, directly to what you're saying is um, people who stay feel valued and they feel that the management, and that would be the manager, sees them as a real human being and actually cares about them.
Yeah.
Because you just
Now
said,
we have to. I'm not saying. I'm using that as an example of some things that we do, but across the number of locations that we had in my own practice, and then within specialty dental, not everybody does that well. We have to constantly work with people and office managers to help them be better managers of staff. As you know, in a dental practice, the person that sort of elevates to the office manager is usually either they've been there the longest or they know the most about insurance or something. There's nothing necessarily within the work of a dental practice probably qualifies someone to be a good manager of other people. It's just that they happen to be good at the task that they've been, whatever their position, their role is. And so they need some help and training too. You can't just, put somebody in an office manager role because they're really good at some tasks and assume that they're going to be a good manager of other people. And that takes some training too. So I'm, I don't want you or anybody seeing this to get the impression that I throwing out some good ideas and some things that we do in the past. We don't do all those things perfectly. Like it's a constant work in progress. And that's part of the great thing that I like about being a practice owner, and is that there's constant little tinkering that you can do to make the practice better. It kind of goes to that 1% rule. I don't know if you've heard that story, Jerry. It was the British cycling team was this was like years ago. It was, bottom of the barrel sort of in terms of the worldwide cyclists, and they got a coach in there who convinced the team that if they could get 1% better each day, so they'd be clock. It was a lot of timing and whatever, and anyway, he built this team into the best cycling team in the world, and did it with just, you think about a 1% improvement is not a big deal, but accumulated 1% improvements over time can make really big differences. And anyway, there's a book about that. I can't remember what it's called now. Maybe it's just called the 1% rule or something. It should be called that if it's not, but anyway.
Well, yeah, I think that for years I was um, a consultant with the 3M Corporation when they had Unitech or the Unitech Orthodontic division, and I remember because I was quite friendly with a lot of the sales force. I mean, I was involved in training them, and what always shocked me was the goals that were set by 3M or whoever set the goals for sales, for orthodontic sales. They were just absurd. I mean, they were unattainable. And the sales team knew that. They knew that this was unattainable. So all it did was create frustration and I thought a lack of motivation.
Yeah.
What you're saying, and I was not aware of this 1% thing. What you're saying is just get a little bit better, but it would be important to focus on what it is you've got to get a little bit better at, just slightly better. Do you
Hmm.
agree? I mean, you can't
Yeah.
just say get better. You have to, there needs to be a specific target.
Right. Yeah. And in a dental practice, like there are a lot of targets. You know, just learning a new script or I mean they're getting maybe faster at placing, good restorations. I mean that's helpful too. We've done time studies where we look at a patient, every sort of step in an appointment, including the steps that it takes to actually do a restoration or break it down by, how long the patient is in the chair and everything. And there are ways to get a little bit better with that, even for the doctor. So, the whole team has things that they can improve on. But
This,
most, I would say the things that are going to be the most successful, you can be the same, I'm not talking about doctors getting sloppy because they're trying to get too fast. You'll get more mileage on just being a better communicator with patients and parents. One of the things I was surprised at, we had one doctor, this was early on. We were probably at, I don't know, 4 or 5 locations. And I kept seeing this one doctor get all of these good reviews. And most of these reviews were saying, the doctor came in the room and he shook my hand. And I was like, who cares if the doctor shakes your, to me personally, I didn't, I mean, I didn't appreciate it until I saw the results and the results of this doctor, he's a great doctor and, the work is good. But that 1 second thing of just like, as soon as he walks in, shake mom's hand, how you doing? Look her in the eyes. He could have done anything else the rest of the appointment, but somehow they remember that. And so, I started asking all of our doctors, when you walk in the room, shake the parent's hand. And it's those are the things that if you can find those the things that are easy to pull off and require very little effort but have a really big return, those are sort of the nuggets that you're sort of looking for in a practice. And anyway, that was one that worked for us, and I didn't appreciate the fact that most, we're in the industry, like most of our friends went to dental school with us or something. Like we interact with doctors all the time. It's no big deal to us. We don't even have them call us doctor all the time. But to most people out there, that's a level that, I mean, there's still a respect there, and
well, I think in pediatric dentistry, there's a big respect there because that parent has made a conscious decision to trust that office and that pediatric dentist specifically with their care and the safety of their child. That is huge.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things along the lines that you're saying that I found out, I stopped private practice, I think it's 8 years ago. But personally, what I always did, and I hadn't really thought about this much since I stopped practice, I'm pretty big on shaking hands with people. Um, I think it's an appropriate thing to do. Um, Hugging, I think, ooh boy,
Yeah.
I
I
don't know
don't,
about that. I don't know
yeah,
about
I would never encourage that. You're
no,
getting,
no, no,
especially
no.
today, like you can't get away with some of that stuff. The
I
side
mean,
hug is but I wouldn't even go there.
no,
I'm
no,
not talking, but just a handshake, a
a
handshake.
handshake.
Look
But
them in
what
the
I,
eye and just, I'm happy to see, I'm glad you're here today. Do you have any questions before we get started? That makes somebody feel like, okay, they've had some interaction with a doctor. Because we know the only way pediatric dentistry works is you got to see a lot of patients in a day to make it work. And those days can get busy and you feel like you're on stage all day and it gets very hectic and um, you want to just jump in, sit down, look at your patient, and if it's an exam, you want to make sure you go through all the steps of the exam, and then you got to buzz out because you know that in two other rooms you got other people waiting for exams, and you've got this other. There's a lot going on that the doctor. It's easy for a pediatric dentist to get so caught up in the flow of the practice and the work that needs to be done that they forget to sort of, take a second and just connect with the parent while they're there. And anyway, but it's really important to do that because otherwise they feel like they're in a factory or something. And
well, one of the things I found out because I still run into a fair number of patients. They one of the ultimate compliment is I was in practice long enough that the kids that I treated eventually brought their children to me, and
mm,
that was something I never ever took for granted. But what I wanted to say was, in addition to shaking hands with someone, I always said, and this was brought to my attention, I can't remember how many times, Jeff, I always said, well, thanks for coming in today. Or I'd look at the parent and say, I'm sure the traffic was awful. I really appreciate you bringing the kid in. And I would look at the kid and
mm,
say, well, thanks for coming to see me. I'm happy to see you. It
yeah,
was another thing I would say is, I'm happy to see you. And I wasn't joking. If you say, I'm happy to see you, but you're really not, I mean,
mm,
that's not going to work.
right.
But you would, in addition to shaking hands, that's something I found out later that I ran into a former patient who is now married with 4 kids. And I ran into him in a restaurant, and this woman looked at me and she said, God, coming to see you and Pam and Paula, the 2 women who worked with me, God, it was so much fun. And all of you were always happy to see me. I mean,
Hmm.
she made it a point to say that. And I said, well, I was happy to see him, even happier to see him now.
Yeah.
So um, yeah, I think that is really critical because, as you say, you can get pediatric dentists. I'm quite biased, but a pediatric dentist, I think, should have a natural ability and a natural drive to thank people and honestly appreciate that they're coming in, and that
Hmm.
as a pediatric dentist, I've always thought that pediatric dentists are magical people because, and this was pointed out to me the first day of my residency in pediatric dentistry, that, matter of fact, that professor said, we're magical people. We take a child who's afraid, and when the kid leaves, they shouldn't be afraid anymore, and the parents afraid, and the parents shouldn't be afraid anymore. That's magic to be able to do that. So you would think that even in the heat of battle, and that's where it gets tough, right, Jeff? Because when it's when it's a little bit of white knuckles and tensed masseters in the office, and things are piling up and maybe not going as well as one would hope. That's when you've got to really bring it up. That's when you cannot afford to lay back, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and just finding that sweet spot where you can still be efficient in a busy practice, but everybody walking away feels like they had enough time with you to ask any question to, they still, and so it's a fine balance to sort of find that sweet spot. But you definitely have to do it. Otherwise, you get a bunch of, reviews where, people felt like, a doctor never even said one word to them and they were in and out. Um, but yeah, you've got to, and anyway, I just use that as an example of something that
No,
we
that's
found
I
that was
think I think that's a I think that's a big example. Excuse me. I think that's a big example and something that has to be underscored in a big way
Mhm.
that that you can't afford to not do that. But I think the whole team has to be on board with it.
Mhm.
I recently, 6 months or so ago, I drove from Atlanta to Allen City or Allen, Kentucky, where Lee Boyd is, and in this town of 350. And
Mhm.
he's got an office that I was so impressed with everything about it. But the most impressive thing was that everybody in that office, everybody was having a good time. And they weren't faking it. And they
Uh-huh.
weren't having a good time just because the tribal elders showed up for the day. No, this is how it is there all the time. And I I found that incredibly impressive. So I think it reminds me of Larry Hagman, who many people may not even know who he is anymore if he's still alive. He was the star of this TV show Dallas that was just this gigantic success, and I never watched it. But I did see an interview with Larry Hagman because his mother, Jeff, was Mary Martin, who was one of the most highly respected Broadway actors of her generation.
Mhm.
She played Peter Pan, was kind of the
Mhm.
big thing because of the hit television. Anyway, Larry Hagman suffered from depression, and I would have no idea that. And the person interviewing him on television said, "Well, um, but you've mentioned that you have gotten past the depression." And he said, "Yes, I have." And the interviewer said, "Would you tell us how you did that?" Now, this is before Prozac and all these SSRI drugs and all of that. That didn't exist.
Mhm.
What Hagman said was that he was seeing a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a psychotherapist, I don't know who. And what he was depressed about is he felt he was not a good actor. And compared to what? Well, compared to his mother.
Mhm.
And his mother, he said, my mother was a fantastic parent. I loved her, but I was nowhere near the actor that she was. And I was depressed.
Mhm.
And so the psychiatrist, Jeff, said to Hagman, well, if you can act at all, why don't you try acting happier? And Hagman said, what? He said, well, try pretending that you're happier. See what happens. And the more he got into pretending he was happier, the happier he got.
Right.
So, and that's, by the way, is one of the excuse me, Disney cornerstones. And they call it at Disney management, fake it till you make it. And if you're not in a good mood and you work for Disney and you work in one of the parks, if you're not feeling very happy dappy that day, then pretend you are happy.
Hmm.
And it's cause to be fired if you can't do that. If you can't, um, as they call them, guests in the park. And I've always wondered about a guest at Disney, considering it's like a 150 or 180 bucks to get in. That's quite a guest fee. But I digress.
Yeah.
But there's no reason to not have a good time. And I felt that way in my practice. I mean, I felt there is no reason to not enjoy yourself. Now, admittedly, I was doing orthodontics. I wasn't doing restorative pediatric dentistry. And I think just this dovetails into important things that people can do, not when it's a great day at Dr. Berg's office, but when it's not such a great day, then you better bring it up.
One of the things that I used to do, and I still have a hard time getting some of our doctors to do this because, you're busy. When you're busy seeing patients and you have just a limited number of little breaks in the day, it seems like the doctors want to go into the doctor's office and, I don't know, look at
Uh,
stuff online or whatever they're doing, reading or relax. To me personally, one of the ways that made me more relaxed was to just walk around the office. If there was a mom sitting there and her child's getting a cleaning, I would sometimes come in and just sit next to them and just start talking and chatting. And anyway, it was a great way to sort of build rapport, but it was also a way to sort of, calm yourself. Everybody has to probably find that little, moment. But for me, that was more calming than just sort of sitting alone in my office. And so that's another, whatever, little nugget. I want to get back to, we were talking about uh, the transition sort of from one office to an additional office, to
Yes,
multiple
please.
offices. And one of the things I was saying was that, when you notice this overhead, and a pediatric dentist might notice that when you hire an associate, you can pay that associate, you know, enough for them to be, motivated and happy and still have something left over. And so the thing that I realized was, with if you had three locations going, so if my overhead is 52% and I can pay a doctor 33% or whatever the rate was at the time, I think it was about 33%. I can take home, 15%, maybe 10 to 15% of what that doctor is doing. I can take that home without ever having to step foot in the office. And not that stepping foot in the office is a bad thing, but just as an option, for down the road. And so at that amount, I could, if I had three locations as sort of like the minimum, 15%, off of three practices, three locations would give me enough income to be equal to what I would make if I was the sole owner and working every day in an office. And so, assuming those three were all operating at about the same level. And so that was where I went initially. And I was looking for, after having that first location, after about 18 months, I mean, it was pretty busy, and we were to the point where we were considering dropping certain insurances and things like that. And that didn't really make much sense to me. And so I was looking for a way to accommodate more patients. And that's when another practice became like a possibility. And then about a year after that one, there was I had a friend who was in real estate, and they were building like a building, and there was going to be a general dentist and an orthodontist, and they wanted a pediatric dentist in there, and it was in a location that sort of made sense. And so we did that one as a de novo. And then from there, it was just sort of, I just kind of kept with that concept where it was maybe an office a year, sometimes two offices in a year. And throughout that, there I came up with some way, not I came up with, but I sort of discovered some ways to sort of get past or to make some of the lending that you have to do to pull that off work. And I've done, if you're talking about lending, like I've done everything from SBA to seller finance. There's a few other steps in between, all of which can be good depending on the circumstance. I would 100% try to, if you're acquiring a practice, try to get the seller to seller finance it. I would do that every day of the week, basically. But you can't, not every seller is willing to do that. But there are some things you can do to try to talk a seller into doing that. There are some advantages to the seller. In fact, a lot of times there are guys who are retiring, and if they receive a big chunk of money all up front, that's going to be a big tax burden for them. And so breaking that down into smaller nuggets in terms of like your payments can be more palatable to them. It's an asset. There's almost no risk to them, because if you default, they get their practice back, and they've probably made some money off of your payments, and they can sell it again. So there's almost no risk to a seller to do a seller finance deal. I don't want to like go down the rabbit hole of different financing options, but there are some lenders out there that specialize in medical and dental practices. If you can't get a seller to finance it, there are traditional banks. You can go all the way to SBA. I did SBA once, but it was such a pain in the butt. I probably would never do that again. Um,
Imagine that. You know,
for like 1% on your loan. Like to me, it was like it just wasn't worth it. It took like 6 months to pull off. And then afterwards, every quarter they want to see your financials and everything. I was just like, this is a this is a major pain. So yeah.
One of the things that didn't come up that this Allison, this probably should have been in the very beginning, but if people didn't have a chance to read your specific bio, Jeff, they wouldn't be aware that you were so interested in business and had such a natural feel for it. You pursued and earned an MBA, isn't that right?
Yeah, when we got to I think 7 or 8 locations, I was right on that cusp where
On the cusp.
well, I was on the cusp where having financial conversations with banks and lenders and things, there was a whole vocabulary out there that I didn't really know, and also just in general, just sort of the business side of dentistry appealed to me, and so yeah, I did an executive program at our local, like the University of Utah here, where on a Friday and Saturday, they were all day kind of things. But yeah, after a couple of years, you get your MBA, and it was really impactful. I loved it. I thought it was definitely worth it. Saying that, you don't have to do that to still do multiple locations and really have like a really strong business. I got a lot out of it personally. There were a couple of things I learned in there that made it that more than made up for the cost of it that I learned. But I thought it was great. Yeah. So I did that from 2012 to 2014.
Hmm. Well, Jeff, this has always been remarkably interesting. And for people that have soldiered on and all the way to the end, I will tell you that for not only my professional contacts, but my personal friends, Jeff Burg is one of the finest, most upstanding people I know. And I can't say that about a lot of people. Jeff, thanks a lot for taking the
No,
time to speak with us and with Fireside specifically. Allison, anything you would like to wrap it up with?
No, I echo that. That was such an insightful conversation, and I think you asked so many questions that are top of mind for people who are considering kind of what stage of practice they're at and their path to grow, but also just the day-to-day business operations. So there was so many great nuggets in there. I'll post this recording, and I'll probably also do a kind of quick recap if people just want an at a glance summary of all the great information packed in there. But thank you, Dr. Jeff. This was wonderful. We are so glad to have you on the Fireside FaceTime session. The next session will be August 8th with Dr. Bobby Elliott. He'll be talking teams and attracting new team members, retaining team members. So kind of a good, I think, follow up to some of the discussion you guys had today. But we will send out more information about that. So stay tuned and on the lookout for that invitation. But as I said at the beginning, we're very excited about I feel like this is like season 2 of a show or a podcast. Like we're launching our second season. But Dr. Gerry, thank you as always. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their day wherever they are watching this from.
Thank you.
thanks, guys.
Bye, y'all.